Now, there are so many developments going on right now in the Durham investigation, in the probes into the Steele dossier and other issues. Some of it's coming out through the General Flynn case, which is still ongoing. You know, I think we've got, what is it? I think the 29th. So that would be what, today? Tomorrow. 29th is tomorrow. The 29th, I think, is when they're having the arguments, if memory serves, before Judge Sullivan. And some of the stuff that's come out on the case in terms of what they did to General Flynn, you know, is shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And we're going to give you some of that. Also, we heard yesterday from Maria Bartiromo that now we're too close to the election. We're not going to get the Durham report. We're not going to get any Durham criminal indictments before the election. So, I mean, a lot of people are saying, well, see, we told you so. It was all a running out the clock game. Because you know if Joe Biden wins the election, you're never going to hear another word about the John Durham investigation. There's not going to be a report. There's not going to be any indictments. That will be totally covered up. But a lot of people for years now, ever since Attorney General Bill Barr got put into place in May of 2019, have been saying justice is coming. Just wait, the Durham report. And even Bill Barr earlier this year said it would happen by the end of the summer. Well, turns out we're not going to see it. And now they say now we are too close to the election and it would be political. Well, let me ask you a question. If they're deciding not to pursue honest justice as it comes because there's an upcoming election, is that a political decision or not? I mean, that is the height of a political decision. So they're saying for political reasons, we're making this decision not to release a report because it could have some political impact. So, I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. If they were concerned about not being political, then they would just ignore the fact that there's an election coming, and when the report's ready, they would release it.
But it could benefit the other side.
Well, I don't know how. I mean, we don't even know what it's going to say. I mean, I'm not very impressed by the Kevin Kleinsmith prosecution. You know, it was kind of like the Andy McCabe prosecution. You know, a little slap on the wrist for something that's so provably wrong. It's clearly he committed a crime. He changed documents in support of a FISA application. He forged documents in support of a FISA application. Kevin Kleinsmith did. Andy McCabe lied directly to FBI investigators on multiple occasions, only a couple of which were not under oath. I mean, you got to say, look, if you're the deputy director of the FBI, I mean, even if you're not under oath, don't you have to tell the truth? But there were a couple of times they put him under oath because they knew he was lying to them. They swore him in about a leak that he made to the New York Times. And he still lied to them. And then finally one day he came clean, apparently, in an interview after they'd basically caught him red-handed. And he's like, yeah, it was me. It was me. Well, I mean, are you kidding me? If you or I did that to the FBI, we'd be in jail for probably a couple of years, right? They'd drop the hammer on us. Oh, I can't believe you lied to the FBI. And that's what they tried to do to Michael Flynn, who we don't even know that he lied to the FBI because, remember, the 302 for him wasn't even – the 302 is the FBI write-up of an interview. And, I mean, I've lost a lot of confidence in the FBI. It's hard for me to hear about the FBI or the Bureau investigating anything and not to look at it with a jaundiced eye because, I mean, it's like, these guys – honestly, it's a political organization. It's as political as it was back during J. Edgar Hoover's time, where they attacked political enemies and things like that, and they made decisions based on politics. But the very fact that they don't just tape the interviews, that they wait, so the FBI interviews you, a couple of agents, they make notes, and then they come back and they write up a report, and it's called a 302. And whatever they write up in the report, that's what you said. I mean, wouldn't it be easier just to tape the interview? Wouldn't it be easier just to video the interview? And hey, we don't need to read what somebody wrote about what you said. We could just watch the video. I mean, to me, that's what makes the most sense.
And that is never done?
No, it's not done. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
You could almost have a Zoom meeting on that.
Exactly. But instead, they're still doing it the old way where they come back and write up a 302. Well, what did you say? You said whatever the FBI agents put down in that 302. And guess what? In a case like General Flynn, that 302 may not be finalized for weeks or months after the interview. So people are still going into that document, editing it.
As I remember it.
Yeah, as they remember it. Even people that weren't there, like Andy McCabe, going in and making edits to a document. They weren't even there for the interview. But there was a guy who was a special agent on the Razor investigation, which was the investigation into General Flynn. and his name is William Barnett, and he was interviewed, and so they wrote up a 302 about him, and this has now been released to the public just within the past week or so, and there's some real bombshells in this one because it's clear that Barnett, he says throughout that there was no case there, that they had no case, that they were trying to make up a case. He tried to investigate it. He said at the beginning he gave them the benefit of the doubt because he assumed there must be a case, but he just couldn't see it. He said it was very opaque with very little detail of any specific evidence, so he would try to dig into it. He would try to ask people questions about it, and there were several interviews where he tried to get to the bottom of it and saying to people, well, now, wait a minute, is this something that you know, or is this something that you heard from other people, and questions like that. And at one point, he describes one of the interviewers working for President Obama stopping and saying, look, if you're going to ask questions like that, we're going to be here all day. Oh, well, well then, don't want to miss lunch, that's for sure. Nothing's more important than making sure we get out of here. Let's don't try to get to the truth. Let's don't try to get to the bottom of things. Let's just make sure we get out of here on time. Let's just make sure we make lunch on time at the fine D.C. establishments where we like to eat and enjoy all the finest foods. This guy Barrett said he was even cut out of interviews, even though he was on the team. He was having to push to try to be a part of these interviews, and they cut him out of various interviews. They cut him out of interviews with General Flynn. Why? Because they knew, wait, this guy's a disruptor. He seems to be interested in getting to the truth, not in framing General Flynn, but in getting to the truth. And so we can't have him in on the Flynn interview because then we can't make up whatever we want about it. And we don't know for sure that's exactly what they did, but, it sure seems like it. He also testifies in his 302 that the investigation was top down. So the investigation into General Flynn was run out of the 7th floor, top down. It was run apparently by Andrew McCabe. Now, why would leadership need to be getting into the investigatory details? In fact, Jim Comey told us they never did that they never got into the investigatory details. They always let the field agents run the investigations. Well, Barnett, who was there, says absolutely not. McCabe was running the Flynn investigation. He also at one point asked to be removed from the investigation. It became so problematic, and he recommended that his colleagues get insurance for their activities. And they were all scared to death that they had been doing improper things. They thought they needed to get insurance for their activities. One time he met with Jeannie Rhee, if you remember her, from the special counsel's office. She was an attorney with the special counsel, Department of Justice attorney. And Barnett records that she was obsessed with Flynn in Russia and that she definitely had an agenda to try and find a crime. Let's fit this into some kind of a crime. Sort of the coup de grace of the entire 302 is at the end of the interview, where he says that the special counsel's office, that'd be Bob Mueller, but really Andrew Weissman, right? Because we all know it was really Andrew Weissman who was running things, that they wanted to do whatever they could to get Trump, and that the entire Flynn prosecution was all about getting Trump. That's what he said. That's a quote. They wanted to get Trump. And so this just confirms what we knew, what we could tell by our own looking at the publicly available facts. And this 302 has never been available before. But remember, even with all of these facts in the public record, you've still got Judge Sullivan saying that he may want to pursue his own prosecution with the amicus that he appointed, former Judge John Gleeson. They may want to pursue their own prosecutor. They don't even have a prosecutor. The Department of Justice wants to dismiss the charges against General Flynn because of this exact kind of misbehavior by the FBI, by the special counsel's office. It was a witch hunt. They were out to get General Flynn, and that's not the way a prosecution is supposed to be run. A prosecution is supposed to try to get to the facts, get to the truth, and it's so clear that's not what we had in this case. But the judge wants to pursue it. Why? Looks like political reasons to me. I don't know what it looks like to you, but it looks like political reasons. But, one of the really interesting things that's come out is that if you remember the Steele dossier, that was the intelligence product, which really wasn't an intelligence product just because Christopher Steele used to be an intelligence asset, but it was paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign through her law firm, Perkins Coie, and they paid Fusion GPS, and Fusion GPS hired Christopher Steele to put together the dossier. And they had an end goal in mind. The end goal is we want something that will absolutely slander Trump and will paint Trump to be some kind of a Russian asset. So Christopher Steele, hey, he can get it done. Remember, he hated Trump. That much we know. He was talking about how much he hated Trump. He had to stop Trump, etc., just like a lot of the people that were working in the FBI at the time. So he goes out and he finds somebody who will tell him what he wants to write. And the person he finds is known as the primary subsource. He's now been identified as a guy named Igor Danchenko, and there were actually a couple of these subsources, but this guy is called the primary subsource, Igor Danchenko, a 42-year-old guy, and he has admitted to the FBI that the stories that he told Christopher Steele were fabrications largely inspired by gossip and bar talk among his drinking buddies, some of whom were his childhood friends from Russia. So he said, well, what's the worst story you've heard? You know, or even if you need to make it up, please feel free to go ahead and make it up. Well, here's what's come out. The FBI considered Danchenko to be a Russian spy. Can you believe that? They considered him, since 2009, they had this guy pegged as a Russian spy. He was communicating with Russian embassy officers and Russian intelligence assets operating out of the Russian embassy in D.C. They'd even issued a warrant for him to try to go and get him and interview him about whether or not he was spying, and he left the country right before they were able to get him on that warrant. So the FBI, they even concluded he was, a quote, a threat to national security. So this is the guy, and they knew, he told them, remember, that all this dossier stuff that he gave Steele was made up, but this is the guy. They know that Steele based the dossier on what this guy, Igor Danchenko, said. So this is the guy that all of that Russia probe against the president was based on, is a known Russian spy. Now, or I shouldn't say known, he's a suspected Russian spy. But remember, they said he was a threat to national security. Now, is that the type of person whose information you're going to rely on in an investigation? Somebody who's a foreign asset, a foreign spy, and you're going to take their word as gold, their word as accurate, and use it to gin up an investigation against a political opponent? And that's exactly what happened to President Trump, candidate and then President Trump. Even James Comey said when he first told the president about this dossier that it was salacious and unverified, remember? And remember, they used that very meeting with the president-elect as the news hook to get the dossier itself into print. That was the hook that they used. Oh, they've met with President-elect Trump and told him about this dossier, so now we'll publish the dossier, which has all this salacious, unverified stuff made up by a Russian spy, alleged Russian spy, who himself admitted at the time, back in 2017, January 2017, he admitted to the FBI that this stuff was fabricated, that it were drinking stories with his drinking buddies, that it was a lot of gossip, that it was completely unverified, and he didn't know that any of it was true, but he was hired by Christopher Steele to tell some great stories. He came up with the great stories. He told Christopher Steele. Christopher Steele puts them in his report like they're true, and then passes that back to John McCain and others within the U.S. government. Now, you want to talk about Russian interference in the election. It's not been proved that there was any Russian interference on behalf of Donald Trump. But here we've got clear Russian interference, somebody who is an alleged intelligence asset of the state of Russia, creating stories, fabricating stories to be used against candidate and subsequently President Trump. Now, this is not the only story of Russian interference that we've got coming out just in the past week or so, because we've also got stories about how John Brennan stifled intelligence showing that the Russians actually wanted Hillary Clinton to win. You know, when he was working on the so-called intelligence community assessment that was featured, the Steele dossier is a big component of what they call the ICA that they released in, it was late December 16 or early January 17. There were actually career analysts at the CIA and other intelligence agencies who said, wait a minute, this doesn't match up with the investigation that we've done, the intelligence that we've found. In fact, their belief was that Moscow, Russia, preferred Hillary Clinton because they felt like they could at least work with her, whereas they thought President Trump was unpredictable. He was a loose cannon. They didn't really know if they would be able to work with and manipulate President Trump, and so they preferred Hillary Clinton. But John Brennan stepped in. He made sure that none of that made it into the assessment, In fact, he had his hand-picked analyst to take a lead role in writing that intelligence community assessment. And it was somebody who was a very pro-Clinton CIA analyst who donated hundreds of dollars to the Clinton campaign. And Brennan and her, they knew what they were going to write because it was all about a predetermined outcome, which is not to tell the truth about what's really going on with Hillary Clinton and how the Russians actually favor her, but to try and gin up a story that it's somehow President Trump is colluding with the Russians and the Russians have all this dirt that they can exploit on President Trump. And what we found out over the last 4 years is none of that's true. And for the people that are still holding on to that story, just point me to the evidence. And I can tell you that up until today, it was always just wait till you see the tax returns. Just wait till you see Trump's tax returns because all the evidence is going to be in there that he's been paid off, that he's totally beholden to Russia, to the Russian mafia, et cetera, et cetera. And even the New York Times admits, and I'm sure begrudgingly admits, that there's absolutely no evidence of any connections to Russia in President Trump's tax returns. That right there is the tail of the tape, folks. That's it. End of story. And we've been telling you for years what the end of the story is. If you listen, instead of arguing with us, because we've been looking at these facts, we've been looking at these data points, and all this is more confirmation and more support for the conclusion that we already had reached years ago on these issues.
You told us a long time ago.
We've been talking about this, for 4 years, Pat George. It's been obvious if you're willing to look at the details. If you don't just read the headlines, but you actually dive into the details, you investigate the data points, you look into the facts, you can find out the truth for yourself, too. I know it's not easy. You want to make it easy? Just listen to the Morgan Streetman Show, and we'll tell you everything we need to know. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.